Hello, Dr. Greer here again for consumer behavior. Today we're going to be going over chapter 16, alternative evaluation and selection. And this is one of those things that I think a lot of us do all the time and we don't even realize it. So I'm really excited to go through this and let us kind of dig once again into our own psyches and see how we do these things and then figure out a little bit on how we can use this as marketers to be more effective with people and consumers as they come to look at our businesses and the things that we're trying to market. So we have moved through this entire framework, this entire class, and now we are on the far right side of this, the decision process. Okay, and we are actually at this middle section here where we're trying to figure out what to buy. So we've gone through all the background information, what it means to us psychologically, and now we're going to go through how someone actually makes a decision. And this is about making a list today. So we're going to talk about how consumer choice often differs from rational choice theory. I've probably said this a million times. You'll hear me say it a million more. But I think every purchase, every purchase is irrational, and we look for rational reasons to justify it. Then we're going to talk about the different types of choice processes consumers engage in. Talk about evaluation criteria and their measurement, and then we're going to talk about how that works with us, and we'll go through the 5 decision rules for an attribute-based choice and their strategic relevance. And so those are the things that we want to know how to use when we're marketing. So let's just jump right into it. Consumer choice and types of choice processes. So one of the things that a consumer will do, and each of us does this, is we say, all right, I am looking for a new phone. Now, they're going to go through a criteria in their head of which phone to buy. I'm just going to give a really general view right now. Now, every year I get a new phone. And every year I tell myself it's not going to be the top of the line iPhone. And every year it ends up being the top line iPhone. And it's weird because I start putting evaluation criteria. Now let me throw a caveat on there. I actually got the big version of the phone a few years back. And one of the people that was with me at the time, that was when the cameras were different in the big phones. Now everything's essentially the same between the Pro bigger one and the Pro little one. And one of the people that I was talking to that I was one of my friends, I was telling him I was struggling with which phone to buy. And he said, "You've complained about the size of that phone for the last year. Why don't you just get the size you want?" And I started realizing that in some ways, the ego of the top phone was outweighing what I actually was doing with the phone. And I had to adjust my evaluation criteria and say, you know what? That's great. So now I have an 11 Pro, iPhone 11 Pro. I didn't get the Max because, quite honestly, I hate carrying the Max. And I think if I could get like an iPhone 11 in more of like the iPhone SE or iPhone 8 size, if I could get the Pro with like the cameras that I want, the battery I want, all that kind of stuff in the smaller size, I'd probably actually go with the smaller phone just because I like my phone to be very, in my pocket, not bugging me. I like it lighter. The Pro phones are a little bit heavier. So, I've actually toyed with this last year, maybe going to an iPhone SE. Now, I don't know if my ego could take it. Just to be honest with you, I don't know if I could go with a lower version of a phone, but I'm actually evaluating that right now. So, when we look at that, now I don't even think about an Android phone. I've looked at Galaxy phones, I've looked at Notes, I've looked at, Pixel phones. I just can't bring myself to go into that genre. So a lot of those don't even get, put into the criteria. I think I give myself a tertiary glance through them just to see if I'm missing out on anything I'd like to switch to. But it is interesting to see how people make decisions. And I think the more honest you are with yourself about your decisions, the more you can start understanding others. I love it when we're in a class and you and I could be talking and I could ask you what kind of phone you have. Then I would say, well, would you get the other version? Like, if you have an iPhone, would you get a Pixel? If you have a Samsung, would you get an iPhone? And I love to hear how entrenched everybody is in their technology. And it's one of them that happens in every class I have. We get very animated conversations about it. But the reason I like to bring that up is because it's almost like all reason has gone out. We have decided which team we are on. We're on Team Android or Team Apple, and then we don't allow ourselves to be even open to those evaluations to look at alternatives and things like that. So let's look at an examination of rational choice theory. So the first assumption that we make in rational choice theory is that consumers seek one optimal solution to a problem and choose on that basis. The reality is actually that consumers have all sorts of meta goals that are different from this. So, and I've seen this time and time again. Like a lot of times we think that someone's going to make a rational choice and we don't. We are not rational human beings when we purchase. And so the sooner I think everybody can understand that marketing, that people are making irrational choices and they find rational reasons to justify it. That's how I always put it. We just need to understand that because the more we can understand what is driving the irrational thought, and it doesn't make it bad. Irrational doesn't mean bad. Irrational just means it's typically a subconscious thing that they don't want to admit to themselves. And that's where I think a lot of really powerful marketing happens. Assumption number two. Consumers have the skill and motivation to find the optimal solution. So everyone can go out and do this. In reality, consumers often lack both the skill and the motivation to do it. And so there's, you find typically like what's the best car brand? I can ask you that right now. Like if I had to tell you here's $30,000, you can go buy a car today. Which car do you go buy? Well, a lot of that's going to be, I grew up, my dad told me that Fords were the best cars. I don't agree with that. Okay. It's just, I've gotten to a point in my life where probably buy a Honda at that point. Like that's my irrational view of the world. And it could be your rational view of the world. You could be saying, oh, no. Dr. Greer is right. Honda is the best. Or why wouldn't Dr. Greer buy a Ford? Like, is it a truck? Is it a car? Is it a Prius? Is it hybrid? Like those are all the things that come in, and we have different things going on in the back of our brains. Why and deep, deep, deep in our psyche, why we choose these things. Um, Assumption number three, the optimal solution does not change as a function of situational factors such as time pressure, task definition, or competitive context. Meaning that we would make the same decision if we had unlimited time, unlimited tasks to do, unlimited, like we weren't constrained by any of that. And the reality is context effects are common. And I would just say, like, when you go buy a car, there's a lot of people that drive trucks that never haul anything. Okay? There's a lot of people that drive Priuses that drive 2 miles to work. Okay? You see that? Like, there's just different thoughts that people would say, oh, well, I do it because I bought a Nissan Leaf and paid a little bit more for it. And I remember, I leased it. And I remember when I got it, one of the things I kept saying is, I'm not going to pay for gas. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. And in reality, that was true. And I actually saved a bunch of money on that. But I didn't calculate in the electricity I was going to be paying for. Now, it wasn't horrible. It didn't offset the gas, I got to be honest. But it was just fascinating to hear my mind justify why I was buying this electric car, what was happening, all this. And it was a great car. It had a limited range. And it could only do like 80 miles a day, which was one of the things that was really tough. But I drove that car for over 3 years and I enjoyed it tremendously. Now, I couldn't haul stuff in it. I couldn't jump. I mean, you could jump on the gas and go as quick as you could on the throttle, but it would drain the battery really quick. There's all sorts of little things that were like nuances to it. Was it the optimal solution? I don't know, but it was something that worked well for me for the time that I had it. So, I can't tell you that it was a rational choice, but I enjoyed it, and it's something I still to this day have fond memories of driving that car. So there's three types of consumer choice processes. We have affective or emotional choice, attitude-based choice, or attribute-based choices. And these three things are kind of the way that we decide around the world. So let's talk about affective choices. They tend to be more holistic. They're the brand not decomposed into distinct components for specific evaluation. They're usually done on how you're going to feel afterwards. And we've all made these purchases. It's okay. Um, Choices are often based on the immediate emotional response to it. Have you ever gone to Disneyland and bought a corn dog? Okay. That might be spur of the moment. Some people plan their whole Disneyland trip around that. I'm not going to tell you they don't. But, you smell it. You're like, that's going to make me feel good. I wonder what's going to make me happy today. Like those kinds of purchases are completely fine. But it's good to understand as a marketer, none of these are bad. We just want to understand that people do them. And so we can understand that, hey, maybe I'm going to be trying to use an affective choice decision-making process to help someone know what to purchase this time. Number two here, or I'm sorry, not number two, but consumer choice. So we're going to go into attitude versus attribute. So attitude versus attribute-based choices are simple and complex. Okay, attitude involves the use of general attitudes, summary of impressions, intuitions, heuristics, no attribute by attribute comparison. So going back to Ford versus Honda, like if I just felt like, hey, Honda's a better car, I'm going to go in and make that. If I don't compare like a Ford Escape and a Honda CRV, if I don't go through and make all those criteria things, which is an attribute-based choice. So I bought a Volkswagen Tiguan, and I was looking at the Honda CRV. I just didn't love the way it looked, but attribute I was going through, and finally I was like, you know what? I think with everything I'm looking for, actually the VW is going to be a better choice. Now, if I had been attitude, I would have just gone into the Honda dealership and bought another Honda in my life. Did I make the right choice? I like my car. I don't know. I'll tell you, in 3 years when I get rid of it, and let you know if I felt like it was a good time that I had with that purchase. But you see, there's a difference between like my feeling about something or my attitude about the brand or the car or my attribute going through and like objectively standing back and trying to evaluate those. So when we look at evaluative criteria, what we want to do is typically come down to figure out what the differences are between certain benefits. And so we have a type, we have a number, and we have importance. Those are the three key differences that we can make with these different pieces. And we're going to go into all of this. So when we measurement involves the determination of what we're going to measure, the judgments of brand performance on specific criteria, and then the relative importance of evaluative criteria. Now we're going to talk about doing some laptops here in a second, and that's fine. But think about just for a moment. Well, we'll get into we'll talk about French fries and maybe even housing. I'll get to that in a second. So determination of which evaluation criteria are used. First off, direct methods, including asking consumers what criteria they use during in a particular purchase. So we could do this after someone purchases something. We say, how you probably have taken one of these surveys. How important was the price? How important was the quality? How important was the service to you? How important, they'll have all these different things that they'll ask. And that's so they can know, like, what were you looking for? Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I think a lot of times we get that data, but we've asked the wrong questions. And so that's the hard part, is just understanding that there's a lot of things that we don't know that are going on. For instance, when I buy a car for my wife, she wants a certain thing and I want something else. So for instance, when we bought her last car, I wanted a wing on the back and I wanted a little bit more of an upgraded package. All she cared about was the price. Okay, it didn't matter what it was, how I phrased it, she wasn't going to budge. And I'm not going to argue with her on that. So actually, the evaluative criteria was, what does my wife like? And that was it. Like, that's all I cared about when I bought her car. Now, when we went and did my car, I wanted a different package than what I got on my Tiguan. But my wife was sitting there telling me all she cared about was the price. So I actually got one model down from what I wanted because it was more important to not hear about that from my wife for the next 3 years than it was to get what I was actually looking for. So those are just interesting little things that we can look at when we talk about what's happening. And now we can look at indirect techniques also. So things that consumers won't actually state or cannot state. So projective techniques allow the respondent to indicate the criteria someone else might use. So what would be the thing your wife would most likely want out of a car? See, we've put that on someone else. This technique was used in the last election with Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. The only polling system, I think I've talked about this before, but the only poll that actually got the election right was the one that called people and said, who's your neighbor going to vote for? All the other polls were calling up and saying, who will you vote for? And they were all off. But the one that said, who's your neighbor going to vote for, actually called the election almost exactly because people weren't thinking that they were answering for themselves. And then perceptual mapping. We're going to show you this in a second. I can't wait to show you this because I have a fun one about French fries. But researchers use judgment to determine dimensions and underlying consumer evaluations of brand similarity. And it's a way that we can almost like visually put out all the differences. So I'm gonna show you right now. One of the hottest topics with all my classes is who makes the best French fry. Okay, and so if we were to look at this, I know I get lots of people saying, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa! In-N-Out is at the bottom left, and McDonald's is up at the top right." And people say, "I totally agree," or "I hate it," or "I love it." So it's okay. We can argue these all day, but this is a basic business school graft, I would say. Worst texture to best texture, worst taste to best taste, and then kind of like where they've gone through and mapped them all. Now, this is interesting. Now, whether or not you agree that Popeyes is kind of in the bottom left quadrant, or if Wendy's is in the bottom right quadrant, or if Five Guys is actually supposed to be up there in the top right and In-N-Out is at the bottom left. The only thing worse than In-N-Out looks like Sonic, but that's if you like texture, or that's if you think, I mean, In-N-Out's taste the worst according to this. Just a fascinating thing, and a lot of opinions come out about this. So this is a good way to like start comparing things and saying, okay, what are the two main criteria, and where do things fall in this? It's a pretty good way to create a structure. And now you can create this as a company or as a marketer for your consumers to start plugging things in. And that's a powerful way. That's a little more advanced, but you can actually set up the criteria that people will use in order to find out where they want to be with this. Really free advice, really complex. If you don't understand, you can call me and we can talk about it. But one of the things that you can actually do is set up a like a I don't want to call it a mock, but questions that people can answer, leading them to the right solution, which is going to be your solution, right? Because of certain things that they're going to answer, you can have different responses. So that's a really advanced technique, but it's a really cool one to use in marketing. I think it's a really powerful one. Also, determination of consumers' judgments about brand. So if you were to ask me, let's see here. Well, let's get into the laptops a little bit here, and we can address that a little bit. But we're gonna rank ordering scales. We're gonna have semantic differential scales, and we're gonna have Likert scales. So those three different scales are ones that we're gonna go through a little bit here. But we can see that we can adjust things based on those scales for making sure they get what they want. And then as we decide what is the most important evaluative criteria for people, we can actually go through and adjust, how we are going to address those things with different individuals. So individual judgments are each person's thing. Okay, you get to decide what you think is right. I get to decide what I'm right. And so I think the best thing that we can do is give people the right questions to ask as marketers, and then they get to go through and fill things out. Now, we're going to talk about all these different rules, but we're going to pass on this for a second because I want to get into some of the actual the conjunctive rule issues that come up here. So we establish a minimum on a conjunctive rule. We're going to say there's a minimum requirement for a certain criteria. So talking about laptops, a minimum that we want is a price of 3, a minimum of a weight of 4, a minimum of a processor of 3, battery life has to be at least a 1, after sales support a 2, and display quality a 3. Now, we would set all these and then we would go look at something. Now, this has Lenovo, Acer, Dell, Toshiba. They're all eliminated because they failed to meet all of the minimum standards. So let me just see here. Which one does Dell fail? Looks like Dell passed them all. Processor. Dell has a 2, right? Instead of a 3. So if we were to look at this section over here on the right is our minimums, and then here's all the laptops that we could potentially buy. Of course, we don't have an Apple laptop on here because it would automatically win. I'm just kidding. It was a joke. But the disjunctive rule establishes a minimum required performance for each attribute level, often a very high level. So I don't care about the processor, I don't care about the battery life, I don't care about the after sales report, but I have to have 5s on price, weight, and display. So this is a minimum that we have to have on these things. Okay. So with this, we have a few more, like Dell's out, Compact's out, Acer's out, but Lenovo and HP are in. So we're like, oh, okay. No, HP's out. Why does it say HP's in? Anyway, it looks like, yeah, we would look for a minimum of 5. So it looks like actually everything is out. So we'd have to look at it. Now, decision rules for attribute-based choices. Elimination by aspect rules. This is where we're going to rank what's the most important thing first, and then make sure there's a minimum for it. Okay, so we're going to say the most important thing is price, but it has to have a minimum of a 3. And the second most important thing is the weight, but it has to have a minimum of 4. So we're going to go down through and kind of like sort things out through that. So step 1, price eliminates Lenovo and Toshiba. Step 2 is the weight eliminates Acer. And step 3, all the brands here, HP, Compaq, Dell. Only Dell meets or exceeds the display quality minimum. So that would tell us that we're going to buy a Dell based on this. And so when we look at lexicographic decision rules, consumers rank the criteria in order of most important, then select that brand that performs best in the most important attributes. And it's important to say if 2 brands tie, they are evaluated in the second most important attribute. So our compensatory decision rule states that the brand that rates highest on the sum of the consumer's judgments of the relevant evaluation criteria will be chosen. So we're going to look at that right here. Now, this is kind of what I normally have an assignment for. I think we have an assignment for in this class, which is you go through and you set a score for each one. It's kind of weighting, right? And what we want to do is say, okay, out of a scale of 100, the most important one is price. So I'm going to weight that with 30 points. And then I'm going to give the weight of the laptop a 25. And then the processor a 10. Now the calculations down below, you can go through and do this. This is a weighting measurement. You take all those scores and you multiply them by this weight. And you're going to come out with a score. Now, doing that, the calculation for Dell's 385. So we can see that we come up with different answers to each of these using different techniques. So if we use the conjunctive rule, we would buy an HP or a Compaq. If we use the compensatory, we'd buy a Dell. So herein lies the problem for us as a marketer, is that there's not one right choice. I could sit here and say, well, Dell's 3 times on here, Compaq's 2, Acer's 2, HP's 1. Once again, we're just trying to say if I used all of the criteria, Dell would be on there 3 times, so I'm going to buy a Dell. That's just another methodology that we're using to get to it. So choices are not independent of competitive situations. And sometimes it's called context effects. And so what happens is we can adjust what the choice will be. We set up a binary choice sometimes as a marketer, and we say you could buy this or this. But what if we had a third one in there? It actually affects the way that people think about stuff. So when we add that competitor, we all of a sudden get a compromise option. And the choice compromise brand increases even though consumers are still using the same decision rules, and that nothing has changed. So this is a little bit complicated, but I just want us to understand this. So first off, if we were to look at just 2 apartments that we were going to purchase or rent, apartment 1, the quality is much higher, but the distance is much farther from where we want it to be. So we get 50% of the people that would choose that. Apartment number 2, or B, apartment A and apartment B on the left here, it's less quality, but it's closer. Now, half and half, it would be split down the middle in this theoretical endeavor. Half the people would choose apartment A, half would choose apartment B. Now, if we move over into the right here, choice context 2, if we add a third one, apartment C, that is really close but has really low quality, but it isn't even available. Okay, that's the important part. It's not even available. A lot more people are going to move into that apartment B choice, and a lot less people go into apartment A because of the compromise. They'll say, well, can't have this, I'll just go with the one in the middle. So that's called the compromise effect, and it's something that happens a lot. We just need to be aware and realize that it happens as marketers. So that's chapter 16 about evaluation and selection. It's one of these things that we all do. I hope that you're looking into a couple purchases in your life thinking, what were my selection criteria? Because that's how we start understanding this for our consumers that we deal with all the time. This is Dr. Greer. I'm so excited that you were here. And if you have any questions, just let me know. I'll talk to you later.